The plane fell silent the moment the woman's hand struck the child's shoulder. It wasn't just the audacity of touching a 10-year-old stranger, it was the venom in her voice. "I don't care who let you on board," Mrs. Holloway hissed, her diamond bracelets clinking as she pointed a manicured finger at the exit. "First class is not a daycare for charity cases. Get up." The flight attendants froze, the passengers gasped, but the little girl in seat 1A didn't cry. She simply closed her book, looked up with terrifyingly calm eyes, and whispered a last name that would ground the plane, end careers, and destroy a socialite's life in less than 20 minutes. You think you know entitlement? You haven't seen anything until you see what happens when you mess with the wrong bloodline. The early morning fog still clung to the tarmac at JFK International Airport as Flight 802 to London Heathrow began its boarding process. It was a flagship route for Regal Atlantic Airways, the kind of flight frequented by diplomats, tech moguls, and old money. The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of soft beige leather, ambient amber lighting, and the scent of expensive champagne. In the very front seat, 1A, the most coveted spot on the plane, sat a child. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her name was Maya Sterling. She was small for her age, with hair styled and neat, tight braids pulled back with a simple navy ribbon. She wore a modest, comfortable gray tracksuit and sat with her legs crossed at the ankles, reading a thick hardcover book on astrophysics. There were no parents hovering over her, no nanny fussing with an iPad. Just a quiet, dark-skinned girl sitting in a seat that cost more than most cars. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah with a nervous smile, walked by with a hot towel. "Are you comfortable, Miss Sterling? Can I get you some apple juice?" Sarah asked. Her voice hushed. Maya looked up, her expression polite but distant. "Water is fine. Thank you, Sarah. No ice, please." Of course, Sarah hurried away, glancing nervously at the boarding door. She knew the manifest. She knew exactly who this child was. And she had been briefed by the captain himself. Treat seat 1A with more respect than you would the president. But the other passengers didn't have the manifest. A moment later, the peace of the cabin was shattered by the clacking of high heels and the loud, brash voice of Victoria Ellington. Victoria was a woman who wore her wealth like armor, dressed in a cream-colored Chanel suit that cost $12,000, clutching a Birkin bag that cost $50. She swept into the cabin as if she owned the oxygen everyone else was breathing. Behind her trailed her husband, Richard Ellington, a man who looked perpetually tired and carried 3 of her carry-on bags. Victoria stopped dead in the aisle. She lowered her sunglasses, her eyes narrowing as they scanned the cabin. She looked at her boarding pass, seat 1B, then she looked at seat 1A. "Richard," she snapped, not bothering to lower her voice. "Look at this," Richard sighed, shifting the bags. "What is it, darling?" "Let's just sit down." "I am not sitting next to that," Victoria said, pointing a finger directly at Maya. Maya didn't look up from her book. She turned a page, her focus absolute. "Victoria, please," Richard muttered, glancing around at the other passengers who were starting to settle in. "It's just a child. She's quiet." "It's not about the noise, Richard. It's about the principle," Victoria hissed. Though hissed was too generous a word for the volume she was using, she stepped forward, looming over Maya's seat. "Excuse me, little girl. Where are your parents?" Maya paused. She placed a bookmark in her book, a golden bookmark with an intricate crest, and looked up. "My parents are not on this flight, Mum." Victoria let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She turned to the cabin, soliciting an audience. "Unaccompanied minor in first class? This is ridiculous. They usually shove them in the back, near the galley." She turned back to Maya. "Listen to me. You're obviously in the wrong seat. The stewardess probably felt sorry for you and let you sit here until the real passengers arrived. But I'm here now, so up you get." Maya blinked. "My ticket is for seat 1A. "Don't lie to me," Victoria snapped. "Do you know how much this seat costs? There is no way a child, especially a child like you, is supposed to be here. You're probably a staff member's kid trying to sneak a selfie. Go back to economy where you belong." Sarah, the flight attendant, rushed over, her face pale. "Mrs. Ellington, is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a massive problem," Victoria said, dropping her heavy bag onto the floor with a thud. "There's a stowaway in the seat next to me. I specifically paid for the premium package to ensure a certain caliber of environment. I want her moved now." Sarah swallowed hard. "Ma'am, Miss Sterling is a ticketed passenger. She is in her assigned seat." Victoria's eyes bulged. "Ticketed? Who bought it? Did she steal a credit card? Look at her, she's wearing a tracksuit. I am wearing designer silk. You expect me to believe she paid $15,000 for this seat?" "I cannot discuss another passenger's payment method," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I assure you, she is supposed to be here. Please take your seat so we can finish boarding." Victoria crossed her arms. "I'm not sitting until she is moved. I'm a Platinum Legacy member with Regal Atlantic. Do you know what that means? It means I own you. Move the kid, or I'm calling corporate right now to have your wings stripped." The air in the cabin grew heavy. This was the moment the karma began to load its chamber. Though Victoria was too deafened by her own ego to hear the click, Maya watched the woman with a gaze that was too old for her face. Most children would have been crying by now. Most 10-year-olds would be shrinking into the leather, terrified of the loud, angry adult towering over them. But Maya just watched, observing Victoria the way a scientist observes a volatile chemical reaction. "Mrs. Ellington," Sarah tried again. "We have a full flight. I cannot move her." "Then move me," Victoria shouted. "Move me to 1A, put her in 1B. I want the window seat if I have to suffer through this." "Seat 1A is occupied by a charity case," Sarah said firmly. Victoria grabbed the top of Maya's seat, shaking it slightly. "Hey, do you speak English? Do you understand what's happening? You are ruining my flight. Be a good little girl and go find the other kids in coach. I'll give you $20 if you move." Maya spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the tension. "I don't need your $20, and I prefer the window." The cabin went silent. A businessman in row 2 stifled a laugh. Victoria turned purple. "You insolent little brat," she snarled. She turned to her husband, Richard. "Call the airline right now. I want the ground crew on the phone." "Victoria, the doors are about to close," Richard pleaded. "Please, just sit." "No." She spun on Sarah. "Get the purser. Get the captain. I am not taking off until this situation is rectified. I suspect she stole that ticket. Have you checked her ID? Have you checked her luggage? I bet she's smuggling drugs. That's what people like that use these flights for." The racism wasn't even veiled anymore. It was out in the open, ugly and naked. A tall, stern woman emerged from the cockpit area. It was Nancy, the lead purser. She had 30 years of flying experience and had seen everything from intoxicated rock stars to berths at 30,000 feet. She walked up to row 1 with authority. "What is the disturbance here?" Nancy asked, her voice steel. "Your incompetent junior stewardess refuses to do her job," Victoria spat. "This child is obviously in the wrong cabin. She is disturbing the peace. She was rude to me, and, frankly, she smells like street food. It's nauseating. I want her removed from the flight for aggression." Maya hadn't moved an inch. She smelled of vanilla soap and nothing else. Nancy looked at Maya, then at the manifest on her tablet, then at Victoria. "Mrs. Ellington, I need you to lower your voice. You are disturbing the other passengers. Miss Sterling is a priority guest." "Priority?" Victoria scoffed. "What is she, some rapper's kid? Or did her mother win the lottery? I don't care. I have been flying Regal Atlantic for 20 years. My husband's firm spends $2 million a year with this airline. If you value your job, you will prioritize me." Victoria leaned in close to Nancy, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "If I have to sit next to this child for 7 hours, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you are firing baggage handlers in Alaska by next week. Do you understand me?" Nancy hesitated. It was a moment of weakness. She knew the protocol, but she also knew the power of the Ellington name in New York circles. Richard Ellington's logistics firm was indeed a massive corporate client. If Victoria made a formal complaint to the board, heads would roll. Nancy was 2 years away from retirement. She didn't need the fight. She looked at Maya. The girl was just a child. Surely she could be persuaded. It was unfair. Yes, it was disgusting. Yes, but Nancy calculated the path of least resistance. Nancy took a deep breath and knelt beside Maya's seat. "Miss Sterling?" Maya looked at her. "Yes, sweetie," Nancy said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We have a bit of a situation. This lady is very upset. To make the flight easier for everyone, would you mind terribly if we moved you? We have a very nice seat in business class. It has a TV and ice cream." Maya's eyes went cold. "You want me to move? It's just to keep the peace, honey. The lady is having a bad day. I paid for first class," Maya said. "I know, and we will refund the difference." "No," Maya said. "I am not moving." Victoria threw her hands up. "Unbelievable. You're letting a 10-year-old dictate the flight. That's it." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She began recording, pointing the camera lens inches from Maya's face. "This is Victoria Ellington on Flight 802. I am being held hostage by an aggressive. She looks suspicious. I feel unsafe. Look at her." She shoved the phone closer. Maya flinched, raising a hand to block the camera. "Don't touch me," Victoria screamed, jumping back as if she'd been burned. "Did you see that? She just hit me. She assaulted me. That's federal law, assault on a passenger." It was a lie so blatant it was almost impressive. Maya hadn't even made contact, but Victoria was playing the victim card with Oscar-worthy commitment. "That's it," Nancy said, panic setting in. "Miss Sterling, I'm sorry, but I can't have physical altercations. You need to come with me." "I didn't touch her," Maya protested, her voice finally rising with emotion. "She nearly took my eye out," Victoria lied, checking her flawless makeup and her compact. "I want the captain." The commotion had grown too loud to ignore. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Mark Miller stepped out. He was a man who preferred the mechanics of turbines to the mechanics of human conflict. He saw a crying socialite, a flustered purser, and a black child in seat 1A. He made a snap judgment based on noise, not facts. "What is going on?" Miller barked. "Captain," Victoria said, rushing to him, grabbing his arm. "Thank God. This child, this thug, attacked me. She's refusing to move seats. She's shouting. And she struck me when I tried to take a photo for evidence. I want her off the plane. I don't feel safe flying with a violent juvenile." Captain Miller looked at Nancy. Did she hit her? Nancy was trapped. She hadn't seen the contact, but she saw Victoria's performance. There was a movement. "Captain, it's very heated." Miller looked at Maya. "Young lady, you need to grab your bag. We're escorting you off." Maya stared at him, stunned. "I didn't do anything. She's lying. She told me to move because she didn't want to sit next to a black girl." "Don't play the race card with me," Victoria snapped. "I have black friends. This is about your behavior." "Captain," Maya said, her voice dropping to a strange, eerie calm. "Again, you are making a mistake. You really need to check the passenger manifest again. Look at the full name." "I don't have time for games," Captain Miller said, checking his watch. "We missed our slot because of this. Get your bag, or I will have security carry you off." Maya sat still for 3 seconds. She looked at Sarah, who was looking down at her shoes in shame. She looked at Nancy, who was refusing to make eye contact. She looked at Captain Miller, who was impatient, and finally she looked at Victoria, who was wearing a smirk of triumphant malice. "Okay," Maya said softly. She unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. She reached under the seat and pulled out her small leather backpack. "Smart choice." Victoria gloated. "Maybe you can take the bus." Maya stood in the aisle. She didn't move toward the door. Instead, she reached into the side pocket of her backpack and pulled out a phone. It wasn't a normal smartphone. It was a satellite phone, heavy and industrial, the kind usually reserved for military operations or executive extraction teams. "Put the phone away," Captain Miller warned. "Electronic devices must be off." Maya ignored him. She pressed a single-speed dial button and held the phone to her ear. The entire cabin watched in confused silence. "Who is she calling?" Richard asked nervously. "Victoria. She has a sat phone. That's not normal. Probably her gang leader." Victoria scoffed. Maya spoke into the phone. Her voice was crystal clear. "Grandfather, yes, it's Maya. I'm at JFK. Flight 802. Yes, I'm on board. Well, actually, I'm being removed." The captain and a passenger named Mrs. Ellington say I'm violent. Yes, they're kicking me off. She paused, listening. No, grandfather, I didn't tell them who I was. You said I should travel incognito to see how the staff treats regular people. I think we have enough data now. Meyer held the phone out toward the captain. He wants to speak to you. Captain Miller scoffed. I'm not speaking to your grandfather. Get off my plane, Captain Meyer said, her eyes locking onto his. My last name is Sterling, as in Arthur Sterling. The blood drained from Captain Miller's face so fast it looked like he might faint. The silence that followed was heavier than the plane itself. Arthur Sterling was not just a rich man. Arthur Sterling was the founder, CEO, and majority shareholder of the Regal Atlantic Group. He owned the airline. He owned the airport lounge. He effectively owned the tarmac they were standing on. And everyone knew one thing about Arthur Sterling. He worshipped his only granddaughter, Maya. Captain Miller's hand shook as he reached for the satellite phone. Hello. The voice on the other end was not shouting. It was a low rumble of thunder that terrified Miller more than any turbulence ever could. Captain Miller, Arthur Sterling's voice came through the speaker, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. My granddaughter tells me you are evicting her from my aircraft. Explain to me why I shouldn't dissolve your pension and blacklist you from the aviation industry. Within the next 10 minutes, Captain Miller stood in the aisle, the satellite phone pressed to his ear, his face draining of color until it matched his crisp white shirt. The cabin was dead silent. Every passenger in first class, including the businessman in row 2 and the elderly couple in row 3, leaned forward, sensing the tectonic shift in power on the other end of the line. Arthur Sterling's voice was not screaming. It was worse. It was the calm, precise tone of a man who moved billions of dollars with a single signature. I am waiting for an answer, Captain Sterling said. Why is my 10-year-old granddaughter standing in the aisle of my flagship aircraft while a passenger abuses her? Mr. Sterling, Miller stammered, his hand trembling. Sir, I wasn't aware. The passenger, Mrs. Ellington, she made a credible threat claim. She said the child was violent. I was following protocol for unruly passengers. Unruly? Sterling let out a dry, dark chuckle. Maya has been attending board meetings since she was 6. She has more discipline in her little finger than you have in your entire cockpit. Now, tell me, who is the passenger making these claims? Miller looked at Victoria. She was still smirking, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath her was crumbling. She thought the captain was talking to Maya's father, perhaps some local gangster or upset relative. She had no idea she was staring down the barrel of a corporate execution. The passenger is Mrs. Victoria Ellington, sir, seat 1B. Ellington, Sterling repeated the name, tasting it. Ah, yes, Richard Ellington's wife, logistics. We just renewed a freight contract with his firm last month. That's unfortunate for him. The line went silent for a moment, then Sterling spoke again. Captain, here are your new orders. Listen closely, because your career depends on following them, to the letter. You are to apologize to my granddaughter immediately. You are to reinstate her in seat 1A, and then you are to remove the disruption from the aircraft. Remove Mrs. Ellington, Miller whispered, sweating. Sir, she's a Platinum Legacy member. If I deplane a VIP for a personal dispute, she is not a VIP. Sterling cut him off. As of 30 seconds ago, I have revoked her status. I have revoked her husband's status. And if you do not remove her for verbally assaulting a minor and interfering with a flight crew, I will have the Port Authority arrest you for negligence when you land in London. Do I make myself clear, crystal clear, sir? Miller lowered the phone. He looked like a man who had just looked into the sun. He handed the heavy device back to Maya with 2 hands, bowing his head slightly. Mr. Ling, the captain said, his voice cracking, I am incredibly sorry. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Please take your seat. Maya took the phone and slid it back into her backpack. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, cool and professional. Thank you, Captain. She sat down and buckled her belt. Victoria Ellington's jaw dropped. The smirk vanished, replaced by a contorted mask of rage. What? She screeched. Are you kidding me? You're listening to her, Daddy? I told you. I am not flying with her. If she sits, I walk. Captain Miller turned to Victoria. The fear in his eyes was gone, replaced by the desperate resolve of a man. Mrs. Ellington Miller said firmly, trying to save his own skin. Grab your bags. Victoria laughed. Excuse me, you are being removed from the flight. You can't do that, Victoria shouted, standing up and getting in the captain's face. Do you know who my husband is, Richard? Tell him. Richard Ellington stood up, looking pale. He had heard the captain say Sterling. He was a businessman. He knew that name. Victoria, sit down. Shut up. I will not shut up, Victoria screamed. This is reverse racism. This is discrimination. I am being kicked off for a black brat. That brat, Captain Miller said, his voice rising, is Maya Sterling. Her grandfather is Arthur Sterling, the man who owns this airplane, the man who owns this airline, and the man who is currently deciding whether or not to destroy your husband's company. The name hit Richard Ellington like a physical blow. He slumped back into his seat, burying his face in his hands. Oh my God, Victoria, you idiot. Victoria froze. She looked at Maya, who was calmly reopening her book on astrophysics. She looked at the captain. Sterling, she whispered. Get your bags, Miller repeated. I've already radioed the gate agents. The police are waiting at the jet bridge. The walk from the first-class cabin to the exit door is short, but for Victoria Ellington, it was a mile-long march of humiliation. She didn't go quietly. As the reality set in, she went from shock to hysteria. I didn't know, she wailed, grabbing the back of a seat in row 3. I didn't know she was a Sterling. If I knew, I wouldn't have said anything. You can't do this to me. So it's okay to abuse a child if she's poor? A woman in row 4 asked loudly. Get off the plane, lady. Richard, do something. Victoria shrieked as Nancy the purser firmly guided her by the elbow. Richard Ellington, sweating profusely, grabbed his carry-on bags. He stopped at row 1 and looked down at Maya. Miss Sterling, he choked out. Please, my wife. She's not well. She didn't mean it. Please tell your grandfather. Maya didn't look up. My grandfather doesn't like it when people interrupt my reading, Mr. Ellington. Richard swallowed hard. He turned and followed his screaming wife off the plane. At the boarding door, Port Authority officers were waiting. Victoria saw the uniforms and tried to pivot, digging her heels into the carpet. Don't touch me. I'll sue the city. I'll sue everyone. Ma'am, you need to come with us, the officer said, grabbing her arm. No, Victoria flailed, her hand connecting with the officer's chest. A slap. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The officer spun her round, pulling her arms behind her back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the galley. You are under arrest for assaulting a police officer and interfering with flight operations, the officer recited. Richard, help me. Richard walked past her, his head down, walking straight up the jet bridge without looking back. He was already pulling out his phone, dialing his lawyer, trying to salvage what was left of his life. Back on the plane, the door closed, the seal hissed. Captain Miller returned to the cockpit, his hands still shaking. He picked up the PA system microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We apologize for the delay. The disruptive passengers have been removed. We will be in the air shortly. Drinks are on the house for all cabins today. A cheer went up from the back of the plane. But in row 1, silence returned. Sarah, the young flight attendant, approached seat 1A with a tray. On it was a glass of sparkling apple juice and a small porcelain bowl of warm chocolates. Miss Sterling, she whispered, I'm so sorry I didn't defend you better. I was scared. Maya looked at Sarah for the first time. She smiled a genuine, warm smile of a child. It's okay. Sarah, you tried, but maybe next time don't wait for a last name to do the right thing. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. I won't, I promise. The Atlantic Ocean is vast, dark, and indifferent. But inside the pressurized cabin of Flight 802, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. For the first hour after takeoff, the silence in first class was absolute. No one reclined their seats. No one asked for a refill on their champagne. The other 6 passengers in the premium cabin, they sat like statues, terrified that even a cough might be misinterpreted by the 10-year-old girl sitting in seat 1A. They had just witnessed a social execution, and they were keenly aware that they were currently locked in a metal tube with the granddaughter of the man who owned the sky. Maya Sterling, however, was perfectly at ease. She adjusted the reading light, her small fingers tracing the spine of her astrophysics textbook. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. To her, this wasn't a drama. It was Tuesday. Sarah, the flight attendant who had failed to intervene earlier, stood in the galley, her hands shaking as she prepared the meal service. She had worked for Regal Atlantic for 5 years. She loved this job, and she knew with a sinking dread in her stomach that this might be her last flight. "Do I serve her?" Sarah whispered to Nancy, the lead purser, "or do I leave her alone? I don't want to annoy her." Nancy, usually the picture of steel-nerved professionalism, looked pale. She was currently rewriting her retirement plans in her head. "We do the job, Sarah. We do it perfectly. If she wants water, you give her water. If she wants the moon, you find a way to grab it out the window." Sarah took a deep breath, smoothed her uniform, and walked down the aisle. She approached seat 1A as if approaching a sleeping tiger. "Miss Sterling." Sarah's voice was a tremble. Maya didn't look up immediately. She finished the paragraph she was reading, then slowly turned her head. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and unblinking. "Yes, Sarah. I, the chef, have prepared the menu. We have the lobster thermidor, the wagyu beef slider, or a truffle pasta. Or if you prefer, I can make you a grilled cheese sandwich. We have cheddar in the galley." Maya looked at the woman. She saw the fear. She saw the way Sarah's hands were clasped behind her back to hide the tremors. Maya wasn't cruel. She was just disappointed. "The slider is fine," Maya said softly. "And Sarah, Miss Sterling, you don't have to shake. I'm not going to bite you. I'm 10, I know," Sarah stammered, tears pricking her eyes. I'm sorry about before. I should have stopped Mrs. Ellington sooner." Maya turned back to her book. "Fear makes people do quiet things when they should be loud. My grandfather says. That's the most expensive mistake in the business. Just bring the slider, please." Medium well. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in London, while Flight 802 cruised at 38,000 feet, a very different kind of turbulence was happening. In the sleek, glass-walled boardroom of Sterling Enterprises, Arthur Sterling was a man who believed in immediate response. He didn't wait for apologies. He didn't wait for explanations when someone attacked his family. He didn't just strike back. He scorched the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. He sat at the head of a mahogany table. It was 2 a.m. in London, but the room was full. He had summoned his red team, a specialized group of forensic accountants, corporate lawyers, and private investigators kept on retainer for crisis management. "Talk to me," Arthur said. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder that vibrated through the table. He didn't look tired. Rage was a powerful stimulant. Jameson, the head of legal, adjusted his glasses. He had a file open on the screen in front of him. "We've pulled the portfolio on Richard Ellington. It's messy, sir." "Define messy," Arthur said, spinning a heavy fountain pen between his fingers. "Ellington Logistics is the primary entity," Jameson explained. "They gross about $40 million a year, but their margins are razor thin. Richard Ellington likes to live loud. The Hamptons estate, the Park Avenue penthouse, the fleet of cars, it's all leveraged. He's cash poor and asset rich, but the assets are all used as collateral against business loans." Arthur stopped spinning the pen. A shark-like smile touched his lips. "So he's swimming naked, effectively." "Yes, and the water is cold." "Who holds the debt?" Arthur asked. "Commercial loans are through Vanguard Mutual. Private holdings are with Chase." Arthur nodded. "Get me Harrison at Vanguard." "Wake him up, sir. It's 2 a.m., a junior associate whispered nervously. "I don't care if he's in the middle of heart surgery." Arthur snapped. "Get him on the phone." 2 minutes later, the speakerphone clicked. The voice on the other end was groggy and confused. "Arthur, is everything all right?" "Harrison," Arthur said pleasantly, leaning back in his chair. "I'm looking at the debt structure for Ellington Logistics. You hold the paper on their fleet expansion, correct?" Yes, I believe so. Because as of 10 minutes ago, Regal Atlantic Airways canceled our exclusive freight contract with Ellington Logistics. due to a violation of our vendor code of conduct, specifically the clause regarding reputational damage via gross misconduct. There was a silence on the line. Harrison was wide awake now. He knew exactly what that meant. Without the Regal Atlantic contract, Ellington Logistics lost 40% of its revenue stream overnight. Arthur, Harrison said cautiously, if you pull that contract, his revenue projections collapse. He'll be in default of his loan covenants within 30 days. I know, Arthur said, his voice hardening. That's why I'm calling you, Harrison. I'm giving you a professional courtesy. If I were you, I'd call in that loan first thing in the morning, before the other creditors realize the ship is sinking. I'd hate to see Vanguard left holding the bag for a bankrupt bigot. I see, Harrison said. The business calculation was made in seconds. Friendship aside, the math was undeniable. Thank you for the heads up, Arthur. We'll issue the notice of default at 9 a.m. Arthur hung up and looked at his team next. A forensic accountant named Eleanor spoke up. We found something interesting in the wife's background. Victoria Ellington. She sits on the board of the New York Arts Initiative. It's a charity, and Eleanor slid a paper across the table. She's been charging consulting fees to the nonprofit for event planning. The fees are exorbitant. It looks like she's using the charity to pay for her personal travel expenses, including potentially the ticket for the flight she was just kicked off of. Arthur picked up the paper. Is that so? That sounds like tax fraud and embezzlement. It certainly mimics the pattern. Eleanor agreed. Send the file to the IRS whistleblower office, Arthur commanded, and leak it to the New York Post. Page 6 loves a charity scandal. Done. Arthur stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the London skyline. He watched the blinking lights of a plane descending in the distance. They thought they were just yelling at a child. Arthur whispered to the glass. They didn't realize they were yelling at an avalanche. 5 hours had passed. The plane was beginning its initial descent toward Heathrow. The mood in the cabin had shifted from terror to a strange, obsequious fawning. The businessman in row 2, a man who ran a mid-sized hedge fund, decided to try his luck. He stood up, ostensibly to use the lavatory. He paused by seat 1. A young lady, the man said, putting on his most charming, non-threatening smile. I just wanted to say your composure earlier was remarkable, truly. My name is Robert Vance. I run Vance Capital, if your grandfather ever needs a fresh perspective on his portfolio. Maya didn't even lift her eyes from her dessert, a small bowl of vanilla bean ice cream. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the engines. My grandfather uses BlackRock for his institutional investments, and a private family office for the rest. He doesn't take solicitations at 30,000 feet. And he definitely doesn't do business with people who watch a 10-year-old get harassed for 20 minutes and only speak up once they realize she's rich. The man froze, his smile twitched, then died. I didn't want to interfere, he stammered. Exactly, Maya said finally, looking at him. You didn't want to interfere. So don't interfere now. Mr. Vance swallowed hard, nodded, and retreated to his seat, his face burning red. Nancy. The purser watched this exchange from the galley. She turned to Sarah. That kid is terrifying. She's not terrifying, Sarah murmured. She's just right. The intercom chimed. Flight attendants, prepare for landing. The descent into London was smooth, the city lights sprawling out like a glittering net below them. But for Captain Miller in the cockpit, the runway lights looked less like a welcome mat and more like the bars of a cell. He greased the landing, perfect execution, wheels touching the tarmac with barely a whisper. He taxied toward Terminal 5, the home of Regal Atlantic. But as they approached the gate, he noticed something unusual. Usually, the ground crew would be waiting with the jet bridge. But today there were also 3 black Range Rovers parked directly on the tarmac, right next to where the plane would stop. Standing beside them were men in dark suits, who were definitely not airport security. Tower. Miller radioed. This is Flight 802. I have unauthorized vehicles in my parking box. Negative, Flight 802, the tower replied. Those vehicles are authorized. Level 1 security clearance. Sterling private detail. They are there to recover AVIP. Miller's heart sank. Of course. The plane came to a halt. The engines wound down. The seat belt sign pinged off. Captain Miller opened the cockpit door and stood there, waiting. He knew he had to face her. He had to try one last time. Maya stood up. She put her book in her backpack. She zipped it up slowly. She checked under the seat to make sure she hadn't left anything. She walked toward the exit door. Captain Miller stepped into her path, his hands clasped in front of him. "Miss Sterling," he said. His voice was thick with regret. "I want you to know I deeply regret my actions today. I judged the situation poorly. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive a man for a mistake." Maya stopped. She looked up at him. She was so small compared to his 6-foot frame. Yet she seemed to tower over him. "Captain," she said, "my grandfather taught me that mistakes are when you spill water or forget a name. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose to believe the loud woman in the expensive suit because it was easier than listening to the quiet black girl." "I was under pressure," Miller argued weakly. "A pilot is supposed to handle pressure. If you can't handle a rude woman, how are you supposed to handle an engine failure?" Maya countered. Miller had no answer. "Grandfather told me what he's going to do with you," Maya continued, her tone a matter of fact. "The Flight Simulator Training Center in Manchester. It's a basement job, isn't it?" Miller flinched. "Yes. It is good," Maya said. "You can teach new pilots how to fly. Just don't teach them how to act." She stepped around him. The cabin door opened. The cool, damp London air rushed in. Standing at the top of the stairs wasn't a gate agent, but the head of Sterling Security, a massive man named Marcus, who had known Maya since she was a baby. "Miss Maya," Marcus said, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "Welcome home." "Hi, Marcus," Maya said, finally letting the tension drop from her shoulders. She sounded like a child again. "Do you have snacks in the car?" "I have gummy bears and sparkling water," Marcus promised. "Perfect." Maya walked down the stairs, leaving the stunned crew and the shamed passengers behind her. As she stepped onto the tarmac and climbed into the armored Range Rover, she didn't look back at the plane. She didn't need to. She knew that by the time the sun rose, the world would be a very different place for the people who had crossed her. The flight was over, but the reckoning had just begun. The internet is written in ink, not pencil. Victoria Ellington learned this the moment she stepped out of the police precinct in Queens, New York, 24 hours after being dragged off Flight 802. She expected a private car. She expected Richard to be there with a lawyer and a fix. Instead, she walked out into a wall of flashing lights. The paparazzi weren't there because she was famous. They were there because she was infamous. Someone in economy class, a 19-year-old student named Kevin, had filmed the entire interaction on the jet bridge. He had captured the moment Victoria slapped the police officer, and he had captured her screaming, "I didn't know she was a Sterling." The video, titled "Karen versus the Sterling Empire," had 40 million views by the time Victoria made bail. While Victoria was dealing with the flashbulbs, Richard Ellington was sitting in a glass-walled conference room in Manhattan. That felt like an execution chamber. Across from him sat Harrison from Vanguard Mutual and 3 lawyers from Chase Bank. The air conditioning was humming, but Richard was sweating through his bespoke suit. "This is a misunderstanding," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking. "The contract with Regal Atlantic. Arthur Sterling is just angry. I can smooth this over. We have a 20-year relationship." Harrison didn't look up from his file. "Arthur Sterling isn't just angry, Richard. He's scorched earth angry. He didn't just cancel the contract, he invoked the moral turpitude clause. That means he doesn't have to pay you a severance penalty. You're out the revenue. Effective yesterday." "We can pivot," Richard said desperately. "We have other clients." "Not anymore," the lawyer from Chase interjected, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "This morning, 3 other major shipping partners paused their contracts. No one wants to be associated with the Ellington brand right now. Your wife is trending on Twitter for racial harassment. It's a PR nightmare." Richard stared at the paper. "So what are you saying? We're calling the loans," Harrison said, finally meeting Richard's eyes. "All of them, the fleet financing, the warehouse mortgages, and the personal line of credit secured by your stock. I can't pay that back immediately. That's $60 million. Then we begin asset seizure, Harrison said calmly, closing the folder. We've already frozen the accounts. The Hamptons house goes on the market Monday. The penthouse on Tuesday, and Richard, the company car, is being towed from the garage downstairs as we speak. Richard Ellington walked out of that building a ruined man. He tried to hail a cab, but his credit card was declined. He had to walk 40 blocks home in the rain. The social exile. 3 weeks later, the karma hit Victoria where it hurt most. Her social calendar, the Metropolitan Charity Gala, was the highlight of the New York social season. Victoria had spent 6 months planning her outfit, a custom-made emerald gown. She assumed that despite the unpleasantness, her money and connections would still grant her entry. She arrived at the venue, stepping out of a hired Uber, since the Bentley had been repossessed. She walked up the red carpet, head held high, ignoring the whispers from the photographers. She reached the check-in desk. The woman holding the clipboard was someone Victoria had known for 10 years, a woman named Claire, who Victoria had often bullied into giving her better tables at luncheons. Name? Claire asked, looking straight through Victoria. Don't be silly, Claire. It's Victoria, Victoria Ellington. Claire ran her finger down the list. She stopped. She looked up. I'm sorry, you're not on the list. Victoria let out a sharp, nervous laugh. Of course I am. I bought a platinum table. It cost $50,000. That table was refunded, Claire said, her voice loud enough for the people in line behind Victoria to hear. The board voted last week. We have a strict policy against hate speech. We returned your money. You aren't welcome here, Victoria. You can't do this, Victoria hissed, grabbing the edge of the podium. I made you, Claire. I got you onto this committee. Security, Claire said, speaking into her headset. 2 large men stepped out of the shadows. They weren't gentle. They took Victoria by the elbows and escorted her off the red carpet, past the snickering crowd and onto the sidewalk as she stood there, humiliated in her emerald gown. A black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb. The back window rolled down. Inside sat Arthur Sterling, looking dapper in a tuxedo. Beside him sat Maya, wearing a simple, elegant navy dress. Victoria froze. She locked eyes with the man who had dismantled her life. Arthur didn't yell. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at her with a mixture of pity and indifference, the way one looks at a bug they have already stepped on. Lovely evening for a walk, Mrs. Ellington. Arthur said, You ruined me. Victoria screamed, tears streaming down her face. You took everything. I took nothing, Arthur replied calmly. I simply showed the world who you really were. The world did the rest. He rolled up the window. The car glided away toward the Garlow entrance, leaving Victoria standing alone on the cold pavement. 6 months later, the Ellington bankruptcy was finalized. They had lost the penthouse, the summer home, the cars, and the art collection. Richard had moved into a small, 1-bedroom apartment in New Jersey. Victoria, unable to cope with the loss of status, had moved back in with her mother in Ohio, where she spent her days arguing with strangers on Facebook who still mocked her. But there was one final piece of business, the estate auction to pay off the final creditors. The remaining personal items of Victoria Ellington were sold off at a public auction house in Manhattan. The centerpiece of the auction was her collection of handbags, Hermes, Chanel, Louis Vuitton. These were the bags she had used as weapons of status, the bags she had clutched while looking down on people. The auction room was full. In the back row, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and jeans, sat a young girl. Lot 42, the auctioneer announced, a Hermes Birkin in Togo leather, gold hardware, formerly the property of Mrs. Victoria Ellington. The bidding started. It was aggressive. 5,000, 6,000, 10,000. Do I hear 12, 20,000? A voice from the back called out. The room turned. It was the girl in the hoodie. It was Maya Sterling. She held up her paddle. Number 1. The room went silent. No one dared bid against a Sterling. Sold, the auctioneer said. To bid a 1 for $20,000. Maya walked to the front to claim the bag. It was the same bag Victoria had slammed onto the floor of the plane. The bag she had claimed cost more than Maya's life. Maya took the bag. She didn't put it over her arm. She walked over to the exit where a woman was standing, The woman was Sarah, the flight attendant from Flight 802. Sarah had been fired by Regal Atlantic shortly after the incident, not by Arthur, but by a nervous middle management team. However, Arthur Sterling had found out and hired her personally to work for his charitable foundation. "Here," Maya said, handing the $20,000 bag to Sarah. "Maya, I can't take this," Sarah said, shocked. "It's a Birkin." "I know," Maya smiled. "Open it." Sarah undid the gold clasp. Inside the bag, stuffed to the brim, were school supplies, notebooks, pens, calculators, and gift cards for uniforms. "Grandfather bought the whole collection," Maya explained. "We're using the bags as backpacks for the girls in the aviation scholarship program. We're giving them to kids in the foster system who want to become pilots." Maya looked at the bag, a symbol of greed and exclusion, now repurposed as a vessel for hope. Victoria Ellington said, "This bag proved she was better than me." Maya said softly, "Now it's going to help a girl like me take her job." Sarah wiped a tear from her eye and laughed. That is perfect." "Come on," Maya said, pulling her hood up. "Grandfather is waiting. We're going to get burgers, and this time we're flying commercial. I want to see if anyone else needs a lesson in manners." The tragic downfall of the Ellingtons serves as a brutal reminder. The status is rented, but the character is owned. Victoria Ellington believed her net worth gave her the right to treat a child like garbage, never suspecting that the charity case in Seat 1A held the keys to her destruction. She lost her fortune not because of bad luck, but because she failed the most basic test of humanity, kindness to a stranger. In the end, the Sterling family didn't just win. They transformed an act of hate into a scholarship of hope. It's a powerful lesson that you never know who you are talking to, so you should treat the janitor with the same respect as the CEO. What about you? Have you ever seen someone get instant karma for being rude in public? Or have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked? I want to hear your stories. Drop a comment down below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic stories every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind or be humble, because karma is always watching.